Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at Sterling and Wilson, Renewable Energy Limited. They're a big player in the solar energy world. We've got a ton of info to go through, company announcements, their financials, and even an investor presentation. Should be interesting.
What's really interesting about Sterling and Wilson is, well, they're not just a regular solar company. They're global. They operate in like 28 countries, doing everything from design and construction to running those huge solar projects, all the stuff they call EPC and O&M.
So not just putting up a couple of panels here and there then.
No, no, not at all. I mean, you look at their investor presentation and you see some seriously impressive projects, like that huge 177 megawatt plant in Abu Dhabi, one of the world's largest.
Right.
And then there's that massive one they're working on in India, over 3 gigawatts for NTPC in Gujarat. That's huge.
It sounds like they've been around for a while to be involved in projects that big.
You'd think so, right? But actually, they've only been in the solar EPC business since 2011. It's pretty amazing how fast they've become a global leader.
Okay, so let's talk about money. Sterling and Wilson just put out their Q3 report for fiscal year 2025. Well, it looks pretty good. Their revenue jumped by, get this, 215% year over year. That's massive. What's behind this kind of growth?
It's a lot of things coming together, really. Those big contracts we talked about, the ones in Gujarat and Rajasthan, they're definitely helping. But it's also their global expansion. They're winning projects all over, and that's what's driving this revenue surge. Their order book is packed, over 10,000 crore worth of projects. That's about 1.2 billion US dollars. It shows they have a lot of momentum right now.
And it's not just revenue growth. Their margins are getting better, too. Their domestic EPC gross margin hit 9.7% in Q3, which is a positive sign. But what does that mean for someone who doesn't speak finance?
In simple terms, it means they're becoming more efficient and profitable in their core business. You see, EPC, or engineering, procurement, and construction, it's a tough business, lots of moving parts. So when their margins improve like this, it means they're managing projects well and keeping costs in check.
Okay, that makes sense. So growing, improving margins, full order book, sounds like they're doing great.
Yeah.
But are there any warning signs, anything we should be cautious about?
Well, every business has its bumps in the road, right? Sterling and Wilson are facing a bit of a legal challenge right now. There's a customer that's going through this thing called the National Company Law Tribunal, or NCLT, for a resolution process.
The NCLT. What's that?
It's basically a special court in India. It deals with insolvency and bankruptcy cases. So basically, this customer is having some financial problems, and that could mean Sterling and Wilson might have trouble getting paid what they're owed.
That's definitely something to watch. And there's also something in the reports about remediation costs, right?
Yes, they're trying to recover costs related to delays and defaults by some of their subcontractors. Think of it this way. When you're building something as complex as a solar power plant, you've got a bunch of different companies involved. And if one of those subcontractors doesn't do their job right or on time, it causes a chain reaction of delays and costs for Sterling and Wilson, and then they have to go after those subcontractors to get their money back.
Sounds like a lot of hassle and expensive, too. How are they dealing with this? Just accepting the losses, or are they fighting it?
They're definitely fighting it. They're actively trying to recover those costs from the subcontractors who messed up. It could mean negotiating, going to arbitration, or even taking legal action if they have to.
Good to know they're not just letting it go. That's a good example for future projects, too. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about this indemnity agreement they have with their promoter selling shareholders and Reliance New Energy Limited. To be honest, I'm a little lost on this one. Can you break it down for us? Why is it such a big deal for Sterling and Wilson? And what does it mean for someone like me trying to understand their financials?
Sure. So this agreement, they signed it back in 2021. It basically acts like a safety net for Sterling and Wilson. It protects them from potential losses that are more than 300 crore, that's about 36 million US dollars. And it covers things like specific projects, payments they're supposed to receive, tax issues, and other legal stuff.
So it's like insurance for all the unpredictable things that can happen in this industry.
Exactly. It gives them a buffer against those inherent risks you find in large projects and complicated financial dealings. It's kind of like, well, it helps them sleep better at night knowing they have this protection.
I get it, and I bet investors feel a bit more confident too, right?
For sure. This type of agreement can be a big factor for investors. It reduces their exposure to risk. It shows that the company is taking steps to protect itself and its shareholders from potential downsides. And that's always a good thing.
Okay, makes sense. So they're growing, they're managing risks, but there are some challenges too. It's a mixed bag, but overall it seems like they're moving in the right direction. One thing I found really interesting is this whole floating solar thing they're doing. I know they have projects all over the world, but floating solar, that's a pretty innovative, right?
Oh, they're definitely pushing the envelope. Their investor presentation talks about their first floating solar project. It's a 450 kilowatt installation.
Wait, floating so what is that? Are we talking about solar panels like literally floating on water?
Yep, that's it. They put solar panels on bodies of water, like lakes or reservoirs. It's becoming more popular because, well, it's a smart way to use space, especially where land is limited or expensive, and it helps reduce evaporation too.
Wow, that's fascinating. But I imagine putting solar panels on water has its own set of challenges, right? What about storms, corrosion, the panels just floating away?
Of course, there are unique challenges. They have to design these systems so they can handle things like currents, waves, and corrosion. And they have to be securely anchored so they don't drift away or get damaged.
Sounds pretty complicated. But if they can make it work, it seems like it could be a game changer.
Definitely. Floating solar has the potential to open up a whole new world for renewable energy, especially in places where there's not a lot of land.
Speaking of new worlds, their global expansion plans are pretty ambitious. We talk about the huge projects they're working on, but there's also that MOU with the Nigerian government. What's going on there?
Right, so that MOU outlines their plan to develop these solar PV power plants in Nigeria. The total capacity is 961 megawatts. It's a big step into a new market with lots of potential for growth.
Nigeria. That's a bold move. What are the potential risks and rewards of going into a market like that?
Well, it's definitely not without risks. Nigeria's energy infrastructure isn't as developed as some other places, and there are those regulatory and political things to deal with. But on the other hand, Nigeria has lots of sun, and the demand for electricity is growing. So if Sterling and Wilson can navigate those challenges, the rewards could be huge.
Sounds like a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
For sure. It definitely shows their ambition and their willingness to take on emerging markets.
So we've covered a lot here. Impressive growth, some challenges, innovative tech, and those big global expansion plans. But there's one thing we haven't really talked about. Debt. How are they managing their debt with all this rapid growth?
That's a good question. They've been pretty smart about it, actually. For one thing, they focus on getting those long-term contracts with reliable partners. That gives them a steady stream of income and reduces the risk of not getting paid.
Makes sense. Steady income is always good, especially with big projects that need a lot of investment up front.
Exactly. And they haven't just relied on traditional bank loans either. They've been using development finance institutions and even issuing green bonds. This spreads the risk and helps them get better interest rates.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket when it comes to financing. And remember that indemnity agreement we talked about. I bet that helps too, right?
Oh, definitely. That agreement makes lenders and investors feel more secure because it provides a safety net against certain types of losses. It signals that Sterling and Wilson is serious about managing risk.
Okay, so they're growing, innovating, managing risk, expanding globally. Pretty impressive story so far. But I'm curious, what will you be watching closely as we dig deeper into their financials? What stands out to you?
One thing that really interests me is their operational efficiency. Their operational EBITDA, that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, it's been steadily increasing. What that tells me is that they're getting better at managing costs and running projects efficiently.
So it's not just about bringing in more revenue, it's about squeezing more profit out of that revenue.
You got it. And that's crucial for long-term success. Winning contracts is great, but they have to deliver those projects and make a profit. That's the key.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. What do you say we pick this back up next time and dive deeper into those legal and operational challenges, and then take a look at some of the broader trends shaping the renewable energy sector?
Yeah, sounds good. Looking forward to it.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for now. We'll be back soon for the second part of our Sterling and Wilson deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.
So we're back, continuing our deep dive into Sterling and Wilson Renewable Energy Limited. Before we took a break, we were digging into their growth and some of those risks, legal ones and operational, that they're up against.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to forget, right, that no business operates in isolation. There's always stuff happening outside,
Right.
external factors you can't always predict, challenges that pop up.
For sure. So let's zero in on those legal and operational hurdles for a bit. Let's start with that customer that's going through the whole NCLT process. How worried should Sterling and Wilson be about this? And what are they doing to manage it?
Well, it's definitely something to watch. I mean, we don't know how those proceedings will end up, and they could drag on for a while. It all depends, really. Sterling and Wilson could lose money on payments they were expecting, or even face project delays if this customer is involved in any ongoing projects.
So there's a chance of a financial hit and a disruption to their operations then. What are they doing to kind of minimize the damage?
Well, they're not just sitting around. They're working with their legal team to figure out the best way to protect themselves and see what options they have for getting their money back.
Yeah.
And they're keeping a close eye on the NCLT proceedings, too, to make sure they know what's happening.
It sounds like they're taking a sensible, measured approach, minimizing the potential fallout while still trying to recoup their losses. Okay, let's move on to those subcontractor issues. Just how common are these kinds of problems in these massive projects? And what's the impact on a company like Sterling and Wilson?
Honestly, it happens more often than you'd think in the EPC world. You've got all these different subcontractors working on these complex projects. Things are bound to go wrong sometimes. Delays happen. Sometimes the work isn't up to standard, and that has a knock-on effect on the whole project. For Sterling and Wilson, it means more expenses, more delays, and then they have to chase those subcontractors to try and get back the money they lost.
It's like a real pain,
Yeah.
and an expensive one too. So how are they handling it? Are they just accepting the losses or are they pushing back?
No, they're definitely pushing back. They're actively trying to recover those costs from the subcontractors that caused the problems. It might involve some back and forth, maybe arbitration, or even going to court if it comes to that.
Glad to hear they're not just letting it slide. It sends a message, right? For future projects, it shows they're serious about maintaining those quality standards. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. I wanted to touch on something we mentioned earlier. Sterling and Wilson's strategy for, well, human capital. The renewable energy sector is booming, and I imagine finding and keeping good people is tough. How are they managing to attract and retain the top talent?
Oh, they're definitely aware that their people are their most valuable asset. They've put a lot of resources into building a strong internal team. Engineers, project managers, technicians, the people who actually make these projects happen. And they've got a solid training and development program in place to keep those skills sharp and give people opportunities to grow in their careers.
It sounds like they're fostering a culture of learning and growth, which is smart in an industry that changes so fast. What else are they doing to stay ahead of the game when it comes to talent?
Well, they're also big on encouraging innovation and collaboration. They want their people to think creatively, to come up with new ideas, and to work together to solve problems.
So it's not just about technical skills. It's about creating an environment where people feel like they can contribute and be creative. That's important in any industry, but even more so in one that's evolving as quickly as renewable energy. All right, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture for a second. We've talked about Sterling and Wilson's specific challenges, but what are some of the big trends shaping the renewable energy sector as a whole? What should investors and, well, anyone keeping an eye on the industry be paying attention to?
Well, one trend that's really exciting is this increasing convergence of different renewable energy technologies. We're seeing more and more projects that combine solar, wind, even hydropower to create what we call hybrid
This is
systems.
like what, a renewable energy mixtape? Taking the best from each source and blending it all together. What's the benefit of that?
These hybrid systems are much more resilient and efficient. They can adapt to the ups and downs of each individual source. Like, say, if there's no wind, solar power can kick in and fill the gap, and vice versa. It helps create a more reliable and consistent supply of clean energy.
Interesting. This seems like a logical step forward, right? Using everything we have in the renewable energy toolbox to our advantage. What other trends are you seeing out there?
Another big one is the increasing importance of digitalization and data analytics. Think sensors, smart grids, artificial intelligence, all those things that can help us optimize how we generate, distribute, and use energy.
It sounds like the renewable energy industry is getting a serious tech upgrade. How does this actually work in practice?
Well, for companies like Sterling and Wilson, it means they can keep track of their projects in real time, spot potential problems before they become big issues, and make sure they're getting the most energy output possible. It's all about making the whole system smarter and more efficient.
So it's not just building solar farms, it's about using data to make those farms run as smoothly and productively as possible. I'm sensing a theme here. Efficiency, optimization, getting the most out of these resources.
Absolutely. And that's going to be even more important as the renewable energy sector matures and competition heats up. It's not enough to just be there. You have to be the best.
Okay, so converging technologies and a data-driven revolution. What else is shaking things up in the world of renewable energy?
Another trend that's really interesting is this growing focus on decentralized energy systems. We're seeing a shift away from those big centralized power plants and towards a more distributed model.
You mean instead of relying on those massive power plants, we're seeing more power generated locally, rooftop solar panels, small wind turbines, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And this is great because it gives individuals, communities, even businesses more control over their energy. They become less dependent on the big power companies. It can also help reduce energy loss during transmission and make the system more resilient by spreading out the sources of energy.
It's like democratizing energy production, putting the power, quite literally, back in the hands of the people. Now let's circle back to Sterling and Wilson. We talked about their impressive growth, but their journey has had its bumps. What kind of hurdles might they encounter as they navigate this evolving energy landscape?
I think one of the biggest challenges for everyone in the industry, not just Sterling and Wilson, is ensuring that the grid remains stable as we bring more renewable energy sources online.
That makes sense. Solar and wind power, they're intermittent, right? They depend on the weather,
Right.
which can make it tricky to manage the flow of electricity across the grid.
Exactly. Grid operators have to constantly balance supply and demand, and when you have a lot of intermittent sources, it becomes a lot more complex. It's a balancing act.
So it's not just about building more solar and wind farms. It's about making sure they can work well with the existing energy system. What are some of the ways they're addressing this?
One solution that's gaining a lot of traction is energy storage, which we touched on before. Batteries are getting cheaper and more efficient all the time, and they allow you to store the excess energy that's generated when production is high.
So it's like having this giant energy savings account, right?
Yeah.
To even out the fluctuations in supply and demand.
Exactly. And they're also looking into other technologies, things like pumped hydro storage, which uses extra energy to pump water uphill to a reservoir and then releases it downhill to generate electricity when it's needed.
Okay, so energy storage is playing a key role. What other challenges do you see on the horizon for companies like Sterling and Wilson?
Another one that's really important is making sure that all the materials used in these renewable energy systems are sourced responsibly. Solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, they all need raw materials, and some of those materials are mined in places with, well, less than ideal environmental and social practices. It's something to be mindful of.
It's like that old saying, right? You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. But in this case, we want to make sure those eggs are sourced ethically and sustainably.
Exactly. Companies like Sterling and Wilson are becoming more and more focused on supplier due diligence, making sure they can trace where the materials are coming from and ensuring ethical sourcing. They want their projects to meet the highest standards of sustainability. They're also trying to reduce their reliance on certain materials, like cobalt, which often comes with some baggage.
It sounds like they're really committed to walking the walk when it comes to sustainability, not just talking about it.
They seem to be, which is great to see, because let's be honest, renewable energy isn't truly sustainable if it relies on practices that harm the environment or exploit people. That defeats the whole purpose.
Well said. It's pretty clear then that the renewable energy sector is complex, it's dynamic, it's full of potential, but it also has its share of serious challenges.
Definitely. It's an industry that's constantly evolving, and companies like Sterling and Wilson are right there on the front lines of this transformation.
All right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Sterling and Wilson, what's a key takeaway here? What makes their story so compelling?
For me, it's their ambition, their willingness to adapt, and their commitment to doing things the right way, sustainably. They're not afraid to push boundaries, explore new tech, and take risks to get where they want to be. They're not standing still.
And they're evolving along with the industry, embracing things like hybrid energy, digitalization, decentralized energy. They seem to be always learning, always adapting, always trying to improve.
And they're doing all of this with a global perspective. They understand that the shift to renewable energy is a worldwide challenge that needs solutions that work on a global scale.
Well said. It's been quite a journey exploring their world. We've gone from financial statements to the future of energy, and it's safe to say that Sterling and Wilson is a company to keep our eyes on. What do you think?
I completely agree. They're like a snapshot of this whole renewable energy revolution. They show us the hurdles, the potential, the sheer scale of what's happening in this industry.
So, for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what's the one thing we hope they take away from all of this?
I think it's this. The transition to a cleaner, more sustainable energy future is happening now. It's not some distant dream. Companies like Sterling and Wilson are leading the way, and their story is proof of what can be achieved when ambition, innovation, and sustainability all come together.
Perfectly put. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Keep those questions coming, and we'll see you next time for another exploration of, well, whatever fascinating topic comes our way. Until then, stay curious. All right, welcome back for the last part of our deep dive into Sterling and Wilson Renewable Energy Limited. We've looked at their financials, we've talked about some of the challenges, and we've even peeked into the future of the renewable energy sector. What's next?
Next, we're going to zoom in on their global ambitions, see how those fit into this whole renewable energy revolution that's happening.
Exactly. We talked about their international presence before, but I'm curious about their strategy. Are they just chasing every opportunity that comes up, or is there a plan behind their global moves?
Oh, there's definitely a plan. They're going after markets with high growth potential, specifically the ones with good government policies and incentives for renewable energy. They're being smart about it.
So it's a calculated approach, not just a random one. What are some of the key areas they're focusing on?
Well, India is a big one, of course, their home market, but they're making big moves in the Middle East and North Africa, too. That region has so much sun, and they're putting a lot of money into solar.
Makes sense. Lots of sunshine, growing economies, that's a recipe for success. What other parts of the world are they looking at?
Australia is another one. They have a strong commitment to renewables there. And they're also branching out into Southeast Asia and parts of Europe. They seem to be going where the action is, where they can use their experience with these large-scale projects.
Like they're playing a global game of solar chess, strategically positioning themselves. But it's not just about finding sunny spots and signing contracts, right? Expanding into new markets means dealing with different cultures, different regulations, political risks. How are they handling all that?
They seem to be taking a very collaborative approach. They're working with local partners, communities, governments, making sure their projects fit in with the local needs and priorities.
So they're not just swooping in and building solar farms. They're actually trying to become a part of these communities, be a good neighbor.
Exactly. It's about building trust, creating value for everyone, understanding how things work in each market. That's crucial for any business that wants to succeed internationally, especially in renewable energy. You need the communities on board, and you need the government support.
And that ties back to what we were discussing earlier about the social responsibility side of renewable energy.
Yeah.
It's not just about cutting carbon emissions. It's about making the energy system fairer and more equitable for everyone.
Absolutely. I think companies like Sterling and Wilson are starting to really get that. They're not just thinking about profits, but also about their impact on the community, the workers, the environment.
It's like they're trying to find that sweet spot between making money and doing good. We're seeing more and more of that these days.
For sure, investors and consumers are demanding it. People want to support companies that are making a positive difference in the world, not just those chasing profits no matter the cost.
So as we wrap up our look at Sterling and Wilson, what's the big takeaway for you? What makes their story so interesting?
I think it's their ambition, how adaptable they are, and their commitment to sustainability. They're not afraid to push the limits, try new things, take risks to reach their goals.
And they're evolving as the industry evolves. Embracing those new trends like hybrid energy, digitalization, decentralized energy production, always learning, adapting, looking for ways to do better.
And they're thinking globally. They realize that this transition to renewables is a global effort. It needs global solutions.
Well said. It's been fascinating to learn about them. We've gone from those financial reports to the future of energy. It's definitely safe to say that Sterling and Wilson is a company worth watching.
Couldn't agree more. They're like a little window into the whole renewable energy revolution, showing us what's possible, what the challenges are, and the incredible potential this industry has.
So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what's the one thing we want them to remember?
I'd say this. The shift to a cleaner, more sustainable energy future is happening now. It's not a fantasy. Companies like Sterling and Wilson are at the forefront, and their story shows what can be accomplished when you combine ambition, innovation, and that commitment to sustainability.
That's a great point. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks to everyone for listening, and as always, keep sending in your questions, your thoughts. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into, well, who knows what exciting topic will come our way. Until then, stay curious, everyone.
Cheers.